the coronavirus. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
Motion by Mr. Rather. Second?
Who seconded?
Y'all can hear me, put your thumb up. Only Mike does.
Can you hear us? Are you hearing Cody York?
I can.
This is Jeff Phillips. I can.
All right.
Who made the second?
Okay, I can hear everybody. Good.
I'll second that if nobody else has yet.
Okay, I got a second by Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you.
Rachel, go ahead and do the roll call.
Chairman Rather,
Yes.
Chairman McAdoo. Yes. Chairman Cush.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
and Chairman Harris.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next on the agenda is approve the minutes. Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I have read over the minutes. I do have a copy of those here if anyone would like to see them. I didn't find anything out of place. I'd like to make the motion that they be approved as presented.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. Commissioner Johnson. Rachel, do roll call.
Commissioner McAdoo. Yes. Commissioner Cush,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Rather,
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Chairman Harris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. I want to announce one vacancy on the Agricultural Advisory Board, one farmer for a 2-year term to expire December the 22. I'd like to announce 2 vacancies on the Conservation Board, terms to expire February of 2026. Next on the agenda is ad hoc committee discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Reed, you're recognized.
those of you on Zoom, can you hear this mic?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. What I'd like to say that, I also served on that ad hoc committee that we had on November the 13th as a member of that committee. We discussed exactly what was presented to us, but it seems that there was a problem as far as the announcement's concerned that's been brought to our attention. So due to that situation and what we're seeing right there, and we do not want to do anything that's causing anyone any problem, if there's concerns or whatever, what we did and how we did it, I'm going to make a motion that we resend a notice, a proper notice again, and recall another meeting with the same individuals of that ad hoc committee, and do that as soon as possible.
I'll second that.
Do I have a second?
Mike Cush, second.
Commissioner Cush seconds. I'm going to briefly say something on this. I don't think that we in any way was trying to hide anything, so I agree with you, Commissioner Pettus. Let's go ahead and defer this on the agenda, and let's have another meeting. So, Rachel, go ahead and do, is there any more discussion? Go ahead, Rachel.
Commissioner McAdoo? Yes. Commissioner Cush?
Aye.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes?
Chairman Harris.
Yes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Next on the agenda is resolution to request our state legislation delegation to exclude Rutherford County from the County Powers Act due to growth in Rutherford County. Commissioner Phillips had brought this up on the full commission, our last meeting, and Commissioner Phillips, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, I would. I've had some conversation, some follow-up conversations with Commissioner Stevens, and he's got a lot of insight to it. I've also followed up, and we've had some conversation with our county attorney, Nick Christiansen, and maybe wording it excluding from the County Powers Act may not be the right wording for that. Maybe we need to come up with something else, because I'm thinking that it might be impossible for us to be excluded from that act. So being able to adjust our development tax and not be in violation of the County Powers Act, we probably need to figure out how to reword that, and maybe Nick or Robert or someone could give us some insight there. But the resolution has been bounced off of our county attorney, and I think you have it there, Mr. Chairman, and you may want to read it. And there are some language that's different than what we tried before, but I think more than anything else, what we're asking for at this point in time is to be able to adjust our development tax and not make wholesale changes to the County Powers Act. So I think that's the difference. And once again, we may want to reword the title of that solution. Robert, do you think that that's probably what we ought to do?
Mr. Chairman, am I recognized?
Yes, you're recognized.
Thank you. I read through the document that the attorney drafted up for us, and I had some questions and concerns about it. I do think we're going to have more luck if we try to find some way to address this without exempting Rutherford County only. It's either going to have to be a wholesale thing where everybody a certain size or bigger gets exempted from it, or nobody. I don't think they're going to just exempt Rutherford County. It would be great if they would, but I think the way that law is written, it does not allow the counties that had development taxes prior to that County Powers Act being passed to adjust theirs. I think you're locked in with what you had before that County Powers Act passed. So one thing they could do would be to allow the counties that had the development tax in place before the County Powers Act went into effect would be to modify or adjust theirs maybe up to a certain limit or something to that effect. Now, we could always switch to the square footage based model, and I asked our codes director for the number of permits that were pulled and the average square footage. The way this County Powers Act is worded, it lets the counties charge up to $1 per square foot on each new single family dwelling unit. And in the unincorporated area, there were 883 of those in 2020, and the average was 2,606 square feet, according to Ms. Bell, and that's $2.3 million. But that does not include any building permits that were issued in Murfreesboro, Smyrna, or Laverne. And as we know, there's been a lot of apartments built in those jurisdictions, so the average square foot would probably be lower than the 2,600 in those, and it might bring the overall amount down to 2,000, 2,200 or somewhere in that. And she was working on getting the number of permits that were issued in those jurisdictions for us so we could try to find out some more solid numbers. If we switch to that dollar a square foot model, I believe that we would be able to collect more revenue, but the problem is that we could not collect it until the back end of the process when the home is sold. But right now, as I understand, when a developer records a plat, they pay $750 per lot up front, and then when they build the house and sell it, they pay the $750 remaining at that time within 60 days. So we have a cash flow now that's based on half up front and half on the back end. Under this County Powers Act, if we switch to the dollar a square foot, which would probably generate more revenue for us long term, the problem would be that we could not collect any money until the builder sells the house. So we might have several years with no income coming into that fund, which would affect our bond payments and some other capital obligations that we have. So long term, yes, I think we could collect more revenue that way, and we would have the ability to increase it by 10% every 4 years. But are we willing to disrupt our cash flow to get to that point? One idea that I had was if the state legislators would allow that development tax to be collected when the building permit is pulled, and paid up front, then we would be able to somewhat keep our cash flow in check for maybe a couple of year period. But if we do it the way that the County Powers Act says now, it might be several years, 4, 5, 6 years before we get back to some sense of normalcy with a steady cash flow. If we could get our legislators to simply change the law to let the county collect that money when the building permit is pulled, that would help us out greatly. It's not going to be an increase in the amount of tax that's paid by the developer or by the builder. It's just going to be that it would be paid on the front end instead of on the back end. Now, one more issue that comes along with that is that somebody has to enforce it and make sure that the building permit square footage is the same amount that's built in the home. So if builder X comes in and says, I'm pulling a permit to build a 2,500 square foot home, and they actually build a 3,200 square foot home, well, what's the penalty for that? Who enforces it? So we would probably have to hire another staff member or two to go out and audit or inspect every property to make sure that what they said on the permit is actually what they built. So it might cost us some money there to try to make more money. That seems to me, if we could figure out a way to fill the holes for the few years when the revenue wouldn't come in, I think long term we would probably collect more revenue that way, but we're going to have a few years of shortage on that development tax coming in that would affect our cash flow. And so that's just a decision we would have to make. Do we want to try to collect more money long term and have the ability to increase that by 10% every 4 years? Or do we want to maintain the status quo and keep our cash flow like it is so we don't have to do all the juggling to make the payments for a few years? That's about all that I can tell you.
Robert, I really appreciate you, all the input that you've had in this, and your legal mind is so much more advanced than mine, and I really appreciate you putting a little extra time into exploring that. Let me kind of add to that a little bit. Doug Bodery, Doug, are you on the line someplace?
Yeah, let me get to something real quick, Commissioner Phillips, and I'm going to call Doug up here. Chairman Cush in Public Works had asked for a square footage assessment and house versus apartment. So Commissioner Stevens, it really was off. Now this was done last year, but we would have lost money based on last year on apartment to houses. So that is something that we looked at a year ago. Now here's something that I want you to look at, Commissioner Stevens. As I was looking over the developmental tax, and one of the things in the law, and the act includes language that requires the General Assembly in the 2010 legislative session to review the provisions of the act to ascertain the effect on and the needs of the counties which did not qualify to levy the tax under the act. At that time, it's possible the General Assembly would expand or modify the provisions governing which counties may levy the tax. That study was never done. So that's one of the things that I want to do is ask our legislators why this study wasn't done and when will the study be done. So that's one of the things I wanted to bring out there. The other one is the Tennessee Local Capital Investment Act. Now this is where I had talked to Doug Bodery about this. And Doug, come on up. And Mr. Phillips has a question for you as well.
No, I was just going to make that same comment, Mr. Chairman, that related to the 2006 law and revisiting that law in 2010. And then I think there's also some language in there that says it could be revisited every 4 years. And I'm assuming that since they didn't do it, that we may have a possibility we have some wiggle room to adjust ours with some help from our state legislators. Doug, I think Doug was working for the state back at that time, and I think he knows a lot about it. So maybe Doug could share a little bit of insight as it related to what happened in 2006 and what was supposed to happen in 2010.
Yep. Doug, I'd like you to comment on what I just read on the 2006 law about doing a study for 2010. And I also want you to tell this committee about Tennessee Local Capital Investment Act.
I was working with CTAS at the time and at County Technical Assistance Service before I came to Rutherford County Schools, and we had this conversation about back in 2006. Obviously, when this bill became a law, at the time there were numerous counties coming forward, including Rutherford, looking at increasing their development tax through private act, and there was a group, several groups that approached the General Assembly and said we need to, and you were Senator Ketron at the time, and they were looking at saying let's have a general law instead of having all these different counties with a private act with a development tax or an impact fee being this amount. Let's have something that's more uniform across the state, and thus the County Powers Relief Act came about in 2006, and it would allow a county, like many of you know, it would allow a county to say, okay, we can adopt this adequate facilities tax that is authorized by the County Powers Relief Act, but in order for us to adopt that tax, if we already have a private act development tax, that development tax that's authorized by the private act would be suspended while we were under the general law development tax. When that passed in 2006, of course, that forbid counties, and there was an AG opinion that said that counties were forbidden to increase their development taxes under their private acts. But there was a caveat, as Commissioner Harris mentioned, in the 2006 County Powers Relief Act that stated in 2010 the General Assembly would revisit and study the impact of that 2006 law. Obviously, we know in 2010 we were in the midst of a recession, and that I remember working up there at the time was that just took a back burner to other pressing issues dealing with the economy. Development wasn't really new growth wasn't really happening at the time. Fast forward to 2020, January 4th, that study's never been done at the General Assembly. To my understanding, I know as of a couple of years ago, it had not been done any type of formal study in the General Assembly on the impact of this 2006 act. And that's where that's correct. That's correct. So the thought is, of course, that could be something that the General Assembly could be requested to actually do a formal study on how this has impacted Rutherford County.
Well, what I read, that's in the law.
That's correct.
So that should be visited by the legislation. Would you agree? Would you agree with that?
I completely agree as a citizen of Rutherford County, yeah.
Commissioner Cush. Commissioner Cush is our chairman of Public Works, as y'all know. He's also head of the Infrastructure Committee, which is dealing with this. And Commissioner Cush, I'd really like to hear what you got to say on this.
Thank you, Chairman. And Robert, thank you for the due diligence you've put in up to now on some of the research you've done. We did investigate with codes the option of what would happen if we opted out and went to the $1 a square foot. It turns out it would ultimately, at that time when we did the study, it would be a loser on our end. That $1 per square foot would have to be around $2 a square foot for us to gain any traction. Now, the question then became back on the Infrastructure Committee is, well, why couldn't we ask that $1 a square foot to be increased to $2 a square foot? So that perhaps might be a question to ask. At my older age, when you get a little old and grumpy, I guess the question is, and Jeff knows this, we have tried this every year, and to no avail. If we increased our development tax, although that would be against the law, somebody would have to sue us, like the developers, which is basically what Williamson County did. They had to take it to court to finally get a ruling on how their language played out. But Williamson County said, look, man, we're just going to increase it and let the chips fall where they may. And they were taken to court. They ultimately won. But, you know, you almost have to get to the point where either you do two things. You either put a moratorium on growth, or B, you increase your development tax if that is the last resort, and work it out in a court of law. And I think common sense you would like to think, let me rephrase that. You would like to think that common sense would weigh in our favor, that at $1,500, we are losing money every permit we approve on the growth and growth. We cannot sustain the current growth with the $1,500 we take in per house. So it's easy math. So, you know, we're at a fork in the road here, and it will be interesting to see what legislative body might want to do to help us. I have to think that the community would support our efforts to do this, and that a legislative member could actually hurt themselves from a political standpoint if they were to disagree with this. And one thing that's also different, on the infrastructure committee we had in 2020, which was myself, Phil Dodd, Commissioner Phil Dodd, Commissioner Paul Johnson, and then an additional planning commission member, we had multiple meetings with the Board of Realtors, the Board of Home Builders Association. There were multiple people in room 205 multiple times, and they all agreed that something needed to be done. They all agreed that the current lay of the land was archaic, was unfair, and nearly all that room lived in Rutherford County. They pay taxes as well, and they understood that something had to be done. So perhaps for the first time ever, the two lobbying committees, groups that would fight this increase were on board. And I have a gut feeling that for years have been the resistance that our legislative body has given back to us is because they're afraid of that political regime of the homeowners, or the Realtors Association and the Home Builders Association. Those are two strong lobbies in downtown Nashville. And I got to think that comes into play just a little bit. But I'm open to suggestions. Again, I would hate to put a stop on growth, but Jeff has preached this year after year after year. We are like a balloon in planning. It is like a balloon. We keep pumping air into that balloon week after week after week with all these new developments. And every time we see a big housing development come before us, we cringe just a little bit because we know that balloon is going to pop. And, you know, we know Rutherford County is a hot place to be, and developers say it's hot because it's the cheapest county around to do business. Well, Rutherford County is a great place to live because we have great schools, we had great roads, we have a great community. But when you start flooding the streets and you can't get from one side of town to the other side of town under 30 minutes, and traffic is always congested, and schools are overcrowded, and we don't have the money to pay for those, then it quickly sours, and Rutherford County does not become a hot place to live. And we're reaching that tipping point right now. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but something drastic has to be done, and I'm to the point of if the legislators in February when they meet us, if they continue to give us the Heisman, I'm willing and would support that we do a development tax increase, and we'll fight it out in court. So,
Thank you.
thanks guys.
Okay, Mayor, let me get with him on capital, and I'll get back with you. I want you to explain to the committee on the Local Education Capital Investment Act. Just briefly go through it and kind of let this committee see that this is one of our options as well.
We spoke about this. Ms. Spurlock and I came up to the ad hoc committee, the study committee for revenue that Commissioner Kush was over last year. What this bill is, last year this bill went through, was at the General Assembly for the third year in a row. Every year it's picked up steam, it's got closer. Matter of fact, it was scheduled for a floor vote last session when COVID hit. And of course, anything with a cost, with a cost bill, just it got pulled. Basically, the summary of the bill, it's not a tax increase. What it is it takes a portion of the state sales tax that's generated citus to Rutherford County and other growth counties like Williamson, and instead of that funding going up to the general fund, it actually comes as a state general fund. It comes back to the county where it was generated in. Like if it's the state portion of that sales tax that's generated in Rutherford County, a portion that goes back for education, debt service, and capital projects. It would be a substitute for an increase in the development tax for education purposes. I understand there's other issues besides that, jail, roads and other things, but once again, this is addressing the education side of it. The concept is already been proven back in, I believe it was 2004. They did the Tennessee River Resort District Act, and that basically several of the counties, the small counties along the Tennessee River, were able to opt in to this local option, Tennessee River Resort District Act, where it would have the same concept. A small portion of state sales tax collected in those counties was brought back for economic development. That's what those counties needed. So the concept has been proven for years in Tennessee that this would work. The last year, both this commission and the school board did a joint resolution requesting that the General Assembly take this bill up. Williamson County, Sumner County, Wilson County, and several other growth counties did the same with their county commission school board. And like I said, it got ready for a floor vote when COVID hits. Speaking with Ms. Spurlock and I spoke with Representative Baum and Senator Reeves, who both sponsored the bill last year. They said they would put it back in the hopper again this coming session. So that would be something that this committee could definitely consider, is having another joint resolution from the school board and commission to support that bill. That obviously would bring back some good revenue for education, debt service, and capital projects in Rutherford County.
Just curious, you talked about capital improvements for the schools. Where exactly are we at as far as how much money we need to fix all the schools we got right now?
We are backlogged over $80 million for needed repairs and renovations, not repairs, renovations of our school system. We have and that is a multi-year capital improvement plan that we've updated, and of course we brought to the budget committee and health and ed during the budget time last year, and we'll bring it again this year, obviously. And that is, when you look at this plan, you'll see this is, we're not talking about cobblestone driveways. We're talking about a roof replacement on Oakland High School. We're talking about a chiller replacement at another school. Those things that they break, they get old. There's things that we need for heating and cooling and roofs. Thank you, Doug. Is there any questions for Doug?
Thanks, Doug. I'm going to let the mayor, I'm going to recognize the mayor. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Back in '06, of course, I was there in the Senate. Senate Bill 3839 was actually presented by, at that time, Senator Ron Ramsey, later became Lieutenant Governor, and Representative Randy Rinks. So it was a bipartisan bill that was passed in '06. But if you go back and look at the summary on this, it says that in addition, the act includes language that requires what you just read, that the General Assembly in the 2010 legislative session, so 4 years later, to review the provisions of the act to ascertain the effect on the needs and the needs of those counties which did not qualify to levy the tax under the act. And then at that time, it's possible that the General Assembly will expand, keyword, and or modify, keyword, the provisions governing the counties may levy the tax. So I suggest to you, because it says that the language requires the General Assembly in 2010, which it did not. It did not do what it said it would do in this bill. Because of the failure of the General Assembly to study and review and report back based on population either 4 years or at the 10-year census growth, which now we're at the 10-year from 2010 when this was actually passed 14 years ago, I think this is the best path if this committee and the full commission wants to go forward. You can talk about real estate transfer fee. It's unconstitutional. You have to change the whole Constitution in order to do that. You can look at all the other options. This would be what I would suggest, that you go back and say the General Assembly, put it in the hands of our legislators, let them go before their appropriate boards, state and local committees, and say, we failed our counties by not acting and reviewing this, but it still leaves the door open with that language. It says it is possible the General Assembly will expand or modify. So it leaves that door open for them to adjust. So I would go back with that argument in front of the General Assembly and the House and the Senate and say, we need some relief. So allow us, because you didn't do that, without having to do a study, let us increase the fee that we currently have. That'd be my suggestion, Mr. Chairman.
Mike, that's something that you definitely want to look at for your infrastructure committee, is on that study.
Mr. Chairman, that needs to be done fairly quickly because Representative Sparks, what's your final bill cutoff date? Do you know? February 10th, somewhere in that neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good point, Mayor. We're meeting with the legislators on the first Monday of February, so I believe you got to have bills in by February 14th.
Okay, February 14th. It's usually around that 10th or 14th. So this committee will need to act now. You can't wait till your February meeting. You'll need to do something tonight to move it forward to the full commission when we meet, in order to have it drafted to put in their hands and somebody to drop that bill by the 14th in both houses.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
That being the case, perhaps, let me throw this out there, perhaps we could assemble a small crew of Jeff Phillips, myself, Robert Stevens, city attorney, the mayor, yourself, and draft up some, and whoever else wants to volunteer, draft up some language and have that by the end of the week for review, and be able to send that to full commission.
Yep, I agree. Are you okay with that, Mr. Christiansen?
Do you mind if I comment on just a few things to make sure that I understand? Because it's often hard for us all to meet in open and public, right? You know, it's kind of a chore sometimes, and I want to make sure that we get all our comments out while we're all here. I've listened to the conversation. I just want to give a couple points here. The resolution that y'all have that's been submitted tonight, I think I heard first that Mr. Stevens and maybe Mr. Phillips commented that on some of the language it might not work, right? We've tried, and the legislature just ain't doing it for us. With that being said, this resolution that you do have, I think, to be more expedient, you can approve this resolution with the recommendations that you all are wanting to make here. And I think what I'm hearing is, if you have your resolution in front of you, getting rid of, it's at the bottom of the resolution, getting rid of number 2 and number 3. Because I think number 1 was the first thing that Mr. Stevens commented that we wanted to probably keep, and that is to expand the County Powers Relief Act's exception. I can change that word exception. I can change that because I'm not sure that's what we want, but just reading on here, for counties with pre-existing private acts to allow for the amendment of these private acts to authorize the imposition of a new tax or an increase in the existing tax rates outlined in a county's pre-existing private act. Currently, the language of the law, as Mr. Harris, as you've stated, it doesn't allow counties with pre-existing private acts to increase what they're charging. I think I heard numbers that maybe we should increase our development tax from $1 to $2. Well, under the current language of the act, we legally cannot do that. However, there are AG's opinions out there which say that it would be lawful, if the General Assembly wants to do it, to amend that language to allow for counties that already have private acts like Rutherford County to increase their development tax. We just need the language from the legislature, and it has to amend the current language that's in state law. Now, that's a much different task than trying to convince all the counties in the state of Tennessee to agree to accept Rutherford County or other counties based on population. So you're treating fairly all of those counties that already have existing private acts and saying, hey, if you had a private act beforehand, you don't have to opt into the County Powers Relief Act, and instead we're going to give you the authority to increase your development tax. So that's why I would recommend keeping number 1 in there. And then if you want me to help add some language that says in addition to that, and I haven't looked at that provision that Mr. Harris and the mayor referred to about having the legislature do a review, and I'm not sure exactly what that entails, but if we want to add language in addition to what I've just proposed here that says we urge the General Assembly to go ahead and conduct the review as required by TCA, blah, 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 that can put in there. I can put that in there as well. So apart from that, real quick, just because there was a lot of discussion, remember that if you want to opt in to the $1 a square foot under the County Powers Relief Act, you're going to have to repeal your private development tax. You can't do both. You can only do one or the other. And so that would be a policy decision for the county, but you can't do both. Also, remember that if you opt into the County Powers Relief Act, any funds that you get from that tax can only be used for education purposes. Okay, there's a limit on that, and that's a good thing, right? I mean, but that's a policy decision for the county to make if they want to switch to that. Under your current development tax in your private act, you're not so constrained. You can use it for capital improvements. I think it goes into the general fund, and it's utilized for whatever the county may need. So just know that if you opt into the County Powers Relief Act and repeal your development tax, any revenue that you get has to be used for educational purposes. Okay? And actually, I think that's it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jeff Phillips.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'm not a member of this committee, but I do appreciate you allowing me to make some comments. This has been Mike Cush. I couldn't have said it any better, Mike. Good job in presenting that. The bottom line is that I don't think there's any commissioner out there that wants to raise taxes in any way. But the last thing we want to do is to raise property taxes. And for the 100th time, all we want is an option to increase our revenue rather than having to go to the property taxes year after year after year. And I would recommend that this committee adopt the resolution and have a county attorney reword that resolution to cover all the points that we've made tonight, and hopefully with the ability to increase our development tax as needed, not do it now or whatever, but as needed. So I would suggest that the committee do what Nick just mentioned, and that's go ahead and pass the resolution so we can present it before the county commission next Thursday night, and let him reword that resolution to include the language that we talked about as it related to the development tax. That would be a recommendation that I would have.
Mr. Johnson?
I have a question for the attorney. How could it be worded? We don't really need to restrict ourselves to just education only. How could that be worded that it will give us some wiggle room there to, for other projects?
Good question. So just to clarify, under your current private act, the revenue that you obtain each time, I think the process works, they pull a permit and they pay half at that point or half later, however it works. That money, there's not a limit on the money in the language of our private act on the use for it. Okay? It can go to capital improvements or for debt retiredness. And that's generally everything that we do as a county. If you repeal the current development tax, which only our county and our county charges, you by default essentially opt in to the County Powers Relief Act under state law, and you can charge the $1 a square foot. But under the language in that law, by state law, you can only use that money for education purposes. So if you're going to make the switch, you're going to have to use that money for that purposes unless the General Assembly were to amend the language to allow counties that charge the County Powers Relief Act tax to use it for other things besides education, which I wouldn't foresee them doing, because probably the whole point that they passed the thing was so that money could be funneled for education services, which is a good thing. And a lot of times your growth is attributable to the schools that you're trying to fund and build, so you have that nexus. But I also know that you probably use money that you've obtained through your development tax for things other than paying to build a school, I would think.
The suggestion that I had was to follow what Nick was suggesting, and that's adjust the development tax and not try to make a transfer, especially at this point in time, and not confuse the issue or complicate the issue, but just adjust our development tax. Isn't that what you were talking about as well, Mike?
Yeah, yes, and if I heard the mayor correctly, it sounds like we're basically saying to our General Assembly and Congress that, look, you all dropped the ball by not reviewing it 4 years after in 2010, and you missed the increase in the 2010 census. Now it's 2020. We've grown 29% since the 2010 census. So now you since you didn't do your job, you have to let us increase the development tax. And don't wait for a study. Hell, they could drag a study out 4 more years. So don't give them a chance to say, okay, we're going to do the study. Say you promised it, it was in the law, you didn't do it, so now give us the development tax that you owe us. Give us that autonomy to set our own development tax. Because you blew it 14 years ago, so now give it back to us and let us manage our own destiny. I think that's what the mayor said on that they missed the ball on the development tax review 4 years later. If that's the case, I'm 100% with Jeff. We focus on the development tax only, because I'm telling you, the $1 a square foot is not going to cut it. That's not a trade-off.
Well, I agree with the mayor. I mean, when I looked this up and seen this, and that's why I brought it up tonight, because like you said, it's 2021, and they haven't done any study or anything on that. And Commissioner Cush is exactly right. We're growing 22 people a day. So I appreciate everybody. And so what we have here is a resolution, and this resolution needs to go, either we send it to the county commission or we don't. I'm going to read this. And if there's any discussion on it, we'll need a motion to approve it. So the resolution, which come from Nick and Jeff, says, whereas Rutherford County has experienced and will continue to experience exponential growth, and whereas Rutherford County would greatly appreciate the possibility of exploring options other than property tax increases to fund growth, and whereas by private acts of 1996, Chapter 215, Rutherford County adopted an act known as the Rutherford County Development Tax Act, and whereas the said Rutherford County Development Tax was in place before the state legislature enacted the County Powers Relief Act as codified in TCA 67-4201. Whereas, while the County Powers Relief Act provided the exclusive authority for the creation of impact fees on developments after its enactment, TCA specifically authorized pre-existing development taxes such as Rutherford County Development Tax Act to remain in place and continue because they were in place prior to June 20th, 2006. And whereas the Rutherford County Development Tax Act does not itself provide mechanisms to adjust the amount upwards if needed under the said act. And whereas since 2006, Rutherford County has experienced and continues to experience exponential growth beyond that contemplated in the County Powers Relief Act, justifying alternatives to property tax increases to fund growth. And whereas local municipalities are not so constrained by the County Powers Relief Act and may impose other taxes or fees associated with the development, and in fact, local municipalities within Rutherford County have done so and are exploring the necessity of doing so, thereby further evidencing the need for increased revenue to fund infrastructure and other adequate facility improvements in Rutherford County. Whereas in Tennessee Attorney General Opinion number 07-57 of April 15, 2007, the Tennessee Attorney General opined that the General Assembly could expand the exceptions in Tennessee Code annotated 67-42913 for counties with pre-existing private acts to allow for the amendment of these private acts to authorize the imposition of a new tax or an increase in the existing tax. Whereas Rutherford County has a need and wishes to be exempt from the prohibitions and limitations of the County Powers Relief Act to have more options. And whereas the Rutherford County Commission deems it to be the best interest of Rutherford County and its citizens to request the state legislature by and through the Rutherford County delegation to amend the County Powers Relief Act, to expand the County Powers Relief Act exception for counties with pre-existing private acts, to allow for the amendment of these private acts to authorize the imposition of new tax or an increase in existing tax rates outlined in a county's pre-existing private act, and or number 2, provide exceptions and or exemptions from the County Powers Relief Act for Rutherford County based on its growth and or population, and or after investigation by the state legislator by another method deemed appropriate by the state legislators to allow Rutherford County to have additional options to impose other necessary and appropriate funding measures for funding growth and development other than by property tax increases. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Rutherford County Board of Commissioners to respectfully request the Rutherford County Legislative Delegation to propose a bill to amend the County Powers Relief Act to, number 1, expand the County Powers Relief Act exception for counties with pre-existing private acts to allow for the amendment of these private acts to authorize the imposition of a new tax or an increase in the existing tax rates outlined in a county's pre-existing private act, and or number 2, provide exceptions and or exemptions from the County Powers Relief Act for Rutherford County based on its growth and or population. And or number 3, after investigation by the state legislator by another method deemed appropriate by the state legislator to allow Rutherford County to have additional options to impose other necessary and appropriate funding measures for funding growth and development other than by property tax increases. Be it further resolved that this resolution be forwarded by appropriate county officials to the Rutherford County Legislative Delegation and or others as deemed proper. Gentlemen, I read the resolution to you. Is there a motion?
Chairman.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cush.
Somebody must have got paid by the word on that, I think.
Yeah.
That is a lot of gobbledygook that even I don't quite follow. But it sounds like that sounds like the original resolution and doesn't have anything amended that we chatted about the last 45 minutes. So it sounds like number 2, I think, is still in there, which is to abandon the development tax and have the ability to opt into the private act at the $1 a square foot, which I think Chairman Phillips and myself and others have agreed that that's probably not the wisest idea. And also, too, I think we're still in that first number 1 paragraph. I still think there's opportunity for some language in there to point the finger that because of, in reference to the fact that the 2000, let me see, I made some notes when the mayor was speaking. Because in this, that Senate Bill 3839 in 2006, the law called for a 4-year review where language could be modified or expanded. He said keyword modified, keyword expanded. The fact that that was not done, that we're insisting on the ability to increase our development tax. Again, I don't want to ask for a review, because to me that's just a delay tactic that they could drag on for years and years. I would just as soon say, hey, you didn't do the review like you promised 14 years ago. We've grown 30%. We're in trouble. So give us our money, or give us the ability or autonomy to raise our development tax. And, you know, one argument I've always had is development tax was never indexed for inflation. So we're stuck with 14-year-old pricing that was never indexed for today's inflation. That $1,500 should be, you know, $1,750 now by inflation rates. Fuzzy math, but it should have been indexed for inflation. So my opinion is that's way too much gobbledygook for a resolution. I think we should spend a minute or 24 hours with Jeff, Robert, myself to redo the draft or slim it down and just get right to the point about amend. And again, in that resolution you read, you still talk about the ability to change the whole state and make Rutherford County an exception. Robert mentioned early on that that's a pie in the sky. Nobody's going to change that. Nobody's going to make an exception for little old Rutherford County. You can't change the whole state just because of us. To me, that language was in that resolution. That should be stricken. I think we need to make it short and sweet, to the point. We want the ability to amend the Powers Act and to increase our development tax because we're a growth county. And the fact that the law stated that a review was due in 2010, which was not done, blah, 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 we want our money. Yeah, I know that you can't write that down that way, but
why don't we
Jeff?
do this? Why don't we draft another resolution for the full commission and have that wording, and then make sure that we give with each other? Because I think what we're doing is we're kind of getting ahead of a few things. So I suggest, as you know, this committee, that we redraft the resolution and then put it before the county commission, full commission. Everybody good with that?
Yeah, Chairman, let me ask, and Robert and Paul and Jeff and others, are we all in agreement or not that we want to focus on the increase in the development tax and not go down the road of dropping the development tax to do the $1 per square foot? Are we in agreement with that?
No.
We're not. Okay.
No, because we don't know what the study is going to show if they do that. Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Yes, you're recognized.
The most obvious thing here that we're missing is this Local Education Capital Investment Act that Mr. Beaudry just told us about and reminded us about, that we passed last year. And to me, that's the lowest hanging fruit that there is. If it was gaining so much traction last year, I can't remember how much we would have gained from that, but I think it was a pretty substantial amount. And I would think we should send a resolution and maybe send it to the school board too, asking our legislators to sponsor that again and push that to the finish line this year, because that was something that was actually promising, but I think we could get some money from. So I would like to make a motion that we send that same resolution to our legislators again to support the Local Education Capital Investment Act, and maybe ask our school board to join onto that with us too, because that was the easiest thing that they seemed to support, and it seemed like it was moving forward to the finish line until COVID hit.
So that's a separate resolution in itself.
It is, and that to me is going to be our easiest source to increase our revenue with nobody's taxes going up, and that was something that the state legislators were obviously interested in, because it almost made it to the finish line until everything got shut down. So that would be the lowest hanging fruit for us to collect some funds there. So I think we ought to focus on the things that we have a chance of getting instead of the pies in the sky.
But do you not agree that the brought up in the law in 2010 that we should not address that, where they did not do the study?
Well, that was my next. I was going to make another motion after this one to focus on those issues. But the most obvious thing here is this Local Education Capital Investment Act.
Okay.
That nobody's taxes have to go up, and that's such an easy thing that so many people seem to support up there.
Let's do this. We got a motion on the floor for a resolution of the let's see if I got this right, Tennessee Local Education Capital Investment Act. Commissioner Stevens wants a motion for this resolution. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Cush seconded. Any discussion? Rachel?
Yes, sir.
Call roll call. Roll vote.
Commissioner Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cush,
Yes.
Commissioner McAdoo, Commissioner Rather,
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Chairman Harris.
Yes. Okay, Commissioner Stevens, you're recognized.
All right, I would like to make a motion that we send a resolution to the commission and ask our legislative delegation to sponsor any bills necessary to finish the study that should have been done in 2010 to look at the limits and effectiveness of the current Tennessee County Powers Act before the General Assembly adjourns, and to take any necessary action to follow the recommendations that committee might propose. Also, that the dates of collection for the adequate facilities tax be altered so that the county can collect all of the tax when the building permit is pulled, and also that it be changed from educational purposes only to capital projects in general. And that would allow, if they come back and say that the inflation should have allowed for the amount to go up to $1.50 or $2 a square foot, we could look at after the study, we could look at that and see if that's something we wanted to change or if we wanted to keep the status quo. I just don't think they're going to change it to where the private act can be altered. I mean, everybody in the world is going to want the private act altered after this, and I just don't think that there's much interest. The ones I've talked to have said that that's just not going to happen. So if we look at the other things that we have a chance of getting passed, I think we're going to have a better chance of getting something effective for us.
Okay. Everybody got the motion? Is there a second? I got a second from Commissioner Johnson. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Jeff Phillips again. I don't know if I'm out of place. I'm assuming that the position that I have as pro tem allows me to enter discussion on any committee, especially this committee. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Very good. And I know I'm not voting or anything, but to me, I think the resolution that was presented tonight could be adopted with and amended to include all of the discussion that we had tonight, especially the mayor's comments and Nick's comments, the mayor's comments about including things and Nick's comments about excluding things. And those are the things that Mike Cush was talking about, and focus, and that would leave the resolution totally focusing on our development tax. And that's what I heard Nick say, and that's what I also heard the mayor say. And I think that would have a great chance of getting through the state legislature, simply because once again, we're not asking to change any state law other than allowing the counties that had a development tax before 2006 would have the opportunity to adjust those. And let me just see if I've got that clear. Isn't that what you said, Nick? Maybe we could amend this resolution to include the items that we discussed tonight and exclude some of the items too that we've also discussed. Isn't that what you said?
Let me interject. Hold on. First, we have a motion, and I have a second. Now, if we want to adopt what Commissioner Phillips wants to do, then we need an amendment to that motion. So, but right now we have a motion and a second. So,
and we're in discussion.
Yes, and we're in discussion.
I was just trying to get some clarification from Nick, and I think that's what Nick was suggesting. Is that right, Mr. Attorney?
Yes. I can keep it short, and I can also add that, yes, there is a lot of gobbledygook in here. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Cush. I can weed it down a little bit. You want to keep a lot of the recitals in there, basically the first 5 to 6 or so paragraphs, because it lays the land for what we've experienced, what we're going through here. But then in terms of what we're requesting the legislature to do, that can be pared down to be, number one, to amend the County Powers Relief Act to allow for counties that have pre-existing private acts to increase the fees that they're charging under those private acts. And two, what I probably do is put this in a recital, not really urging, because if I'm responding to Mr. Phillips' suggestion here, is not urging them to do the report, but instead in one of these recitals stating that the law required them to do a report and they haven't done it, and so don't have the accurate data, and for that reason they should allow us, because of the growth that we've had, to increase our development tax. So those would be the two things that I've heard I would do, but again, it's the will of this body of what it wants me to write.
That's exactly, in my mind, what needs to be done. That's precise, it's to the point, and it cuts out all of those square footage deals, and it just focuses on what we have and only on what we have and the reasons that we want that done. So
Any more discussion?
I think that the motion actually should be that we adopt the resolution and make those amendments to the resolution that was discussed tonight.
Commissioner Johnson?
My main concern is about restricting it to education. That needs to be addressed, because the growth has more tentacles than just education, because the growth is demanding police service, ambulance service, on down the line. So
Paul,
that's my main concern, Jeff.
Paul, the development tax has nothing to do with education. So if we do the development tax, we're not restricted to education. It has nothing to do with it. Is that right, Nick?
So under pay bonds.
Mr. Stevens' proposed resolution, if I'm understanding Mr. Stevens, you're asking to amend.
Something else we ought to consider, and maybe I should have included this in my motion, was to send this to the budget committee so that we can look at the different alternatives and the different amounts of the permits and the square footages and so forth, to see what kind of impact, if we decide later to switch to this square footage model, like if it goes up to $1.50 or $2 after the study is done and we decide to switch, how much of an impact is that going to have on our cash flow? How long of an impact is that going to have on our cash flow? I would like to know some more answers to those things before we make any kind of decisions. So I don't know if I should make an amendment to my motion to send this to Budget Committee, or if the person who made the second will be okay with sending the discussion there first before the resolution goes to the full commission.
All right, we have a motion. We have a second to vote on Commissioner Stevens' motion. Commissioner Stevens, I'd like you to repeat your motion again, please.
Had discussion.
So the motion was to ask our legislators to sponsor any bills that are necessary to complete that study that should have been done in 2010 to determine if the limits and the effectiveness of the current statute are effective as intended by the original law that was passed in 2006, and to do that before they adjourn, and then to take any action on recommendations that the study proposes at its conclusion, and then also that they allow for a change in the law that lets counties collect all of their adequate facilities tax when the building permit is pulled, instead of collecting it on the back end when the house is sold, so that it doesn't disrupt our cash flow. And then also that it be changed to where the square footage or adequate facilities tax can be used for more of an education purposes only, and change that to where it can just be used for education purposes and or capital projects.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Johnson.
to keep from muddying the water, I've already checked to see if it's okay. I would like to withdraw my second.
Second's withdrawn. Do we have a second?
I don't think you can withdraw a second. He can vote no on the resolution.
I can look it up if we want. This body.
No, I don't think we can withdraw a second. So we will vote on this, on Robert Stevens' measure. You can vote how you want. So, Rebecca, can you do roll call on, roll vote on Commissioner Stevens' motion? Rachel.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Commissioner Rather,
No.
Commissioner McAdoo. I'm sorry, say again, please.
Commissioner McAdoo said no.
Okay, that's what I got. Thank you. Commissioner Cush,
No.
Commissioner Johnson,
No.
Commissioner Reed,
No.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Chairman Harris.
No.
Motion fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Cush?
I would like to make a motion to accept the resolution as read by Attorney Christiansen with the modifications that were discussed tonight and as addressed, pointed out by Chairman Phillips.
Very good. Do I have a second? I have a second, Commissioner Reed. Any discussion? Commissioner McAdoo?
Will that include the mayor's suggestion?
Yes, sir.
And will it go directly to the Board of Commissioners or to budget?
To the Board of Commission. Is that correct? Good. All right, we got a motion. We got a second. Go ahead, Rachel. Did you need to speak?
Commissioner McAdoo.
Hold on.
I'd like to clarify what I said,
Go
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of scratched out a few things that might make it simpler what Chairman Cush was discussing. You could put simple language in there. It's going to be very difficult, ladies and gentlemen. This year, the governor has already called for a special session starting, I believe, Commissioner, Representative Sparks, special session on education only to begin before session actually starts. So that's going to put them behind the 8 ball, and they're going to be scurrying, and to get into something so deep, they're going to punt. And to do a study, as Chairman Cush talked about, they'll punt this and wait for several years to come back because they just want to deal with it. It needs to be laser pointed. It needs to be focused. If that's what you want to do, to put it in the hands of our legislators, ask each legislator, are you behind this? This is what this commission wants. We want you to take it before the state and local committee and get it in front of the full General Assembly and pass. So something simple as, whereas Senate Bill 3839 was adopted, whereas it became law in 2006, the General Assembly in its own language failed to study this issue and report back in 2010. Whereas because of this oversight, therefore we are asking permission to allow Rutherford County to increase the County Powers Act and for it to become law upon passage. Not wait till July, go ahead and pass it, and it becomes law upon passage. That way it allows us to figure that into our budget instead of waiting until next July. That would take us into a whole nother year, if that makes sense, but that's simple language that could be hammered out.
Mr. Cush, you good with that?
I'm elated.
Sir?
I'm elated.
Okay. The motion. We have a motion and we have a second. Rachel?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead with the call.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
No.
Commissioner Cush?
Yes.
Commissioner McAdoo?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, everybody take a deep breath. That was a long one.
Mr.
That was a
Chairman.
long one.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Commissioner Rather.
I want to make a comment before the vote. There's a couple guys, all 3 of the guys on that screen right there have done a lot of work and blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of experience, and I'm, almost 2.5 years into this. But something Commissioner Cush said that kind of stuck with me, that I hope we can all have this initiative. I've sat here a couple years and have heard the same conversation, and my understanding is that conversation has taken place for year after year after year. And what Commissioner Cush said, I agree with 100%. If the state legislature is not going to help us, then we do what Rutherford County needs to do, whatever that is, and we'll fight it out later. But we've got to do what we have to do to support this county and its citizens, its schools, and we can fight it out later. So I just want to make that comment.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to Agenda 6, Employee Identification Badge. The county is trying to increase our safety and security of our employees, and what this, I'm going to have Sonia come on up, and what this is, we're going to require all of our employees to have badges. So I'm going to let her briefly go over this, and this needs to be, this is policy, so this would be passed, needs to be passed by us to the county commission. So go ahead.
Good evening. So what we did is we were looking at, when we looked at the safety and the security of county buildings and offices, if somebody came into a building, the other employees might not know that that's a county employee, or if somebody was in there that shouldn't be in a building, we wouldn't know, are they supposed to be in a building or not. So having a photo identification lanyard visible at all times when you're at work as part of your dress attire, we felt like was something that would be useful not only to the departments, but in addition, later on, as some of our buildings have got the key card access, these also serve for that same purpose. So as we change locks and do other things, this would be a way that it would already be set up and it could be coded by the badge. So the policy that we put in front of you, we worked with Cody York, who's our IT director, and myself, and looking at what some of the other organizations, our sister agencies have done, and also contacted like the sheriff's office and correctional work center and juvenile detention to see what their policies are on badges as they enter their buildings. So this policy is meant to ensure that we have safety within our building, that the employee's picture is visible, it tells their work location. Some of them may be color-coded based on giving them access into different areas of a building. For example, the Justice Center would be different codes for different areas of access within that building. So if our sheriff's office went into an area and they saw somebody with a different color code and knew that they weren't supposed to be in there, that might cause a question if they were wandering a hall. So the whole purpose is really just to be able to identify and also use it as an access point to certain buildings whenever we go to the electronic doors and electronic timekeeping where they can swipe themselves in and out.
Any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Other.
So, I think Doug's back there, he can confirm this, but I think the school system has gone to this, which is really a good thing because you never know who's got a key and this person left and that person got fired and you can't keep up the keys. This is a really simple way of managing that. So the buildings currently, I know everybody's going to have an ID badge, but does their building that they work in have the electronics to open that door or check them in or whatever? Or is that something that we're going to have to do on the back end past or as part of the name tags? We've got to retrofit all these buildings to adapt to that card. Does that make sense?
So part of it, some of the buildings are already set up that way. For example, the courthouse. The courthouse has the key card access. 319, it has key card access. Several of our buildings already have key card access. And as we upgrade features, that would be something that would be added down the road. I'm not saying that we could have the monies to go out and retrofit every building for that. But that is the mindset, because the ID badges that we would get, and I would, our correctional facilities, their key cards, access them to different parts of the buildings as well. So a lot of our newer buildings already have access, or if somebody's had, a building's had a recent renovation or something like that, they will have the access. So that is something long term. The badges will already be set up so that it has that functionality. So say somebody in the Justice Building who they have key card access goes to work in 319. Okay, they would no longer need access to the Justice Building. So with the badge that they wouldn't have to get a new badge or new keys. We would convert their work location to that new work location. It would remove their access from one building and grant them access to the next. If that makes sense. I think that's what
that makes sense, and the whole idea makes sense other than people having keys. And I think it makes it safer for everybody. So that was my only question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
All right, gentlemen.
Chairman, I have a question, if I can be recognized.
Commissioner Stevens, go ahead.
Does this apply to the constitutional offices?
It would be any county building, to my knowledge, they would have and I'm pretty sure like the Register of Deeds, the county clerk, property assessor, the circuit court clerk, all of those offices already have these badges. They already have key cards to get in. So I think this would, she's going to be adding to, because when Cody and I checked to see how many departments were going to need badges, it wasn't that many additional departments. It was just a few departments. And so this would make us uniform in our processes.
Well, I guess my question is, do they already have some kind of internal policy that they follow so that ours doesn't contradict theirs? Did anybody ask the constitutional officers if their officers were going to follow this policy? I guess that's my question.
So the property assessor and the Register of Deeds has their own handbook, and Ms. Kroll and Ms. Harrell follow the county's handbook. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Stevens?
Well, should we exempt the two that have their own handbooks from the resolution to make it clearer?
Yes, I mean, they have their own handbook. It wouldn't be. Mayor, go ahead.
As we were studying this, the constitutionals basically are in those offices. The counties own the buildings. Our IT departments control those devices and the doors and the swipe panels, not the constitutional officers. They're there at the pleasure of the General Assembly or the county commission. But if something goes wrong with that swipe pad going into Lisa Kroll's office or any of those other buildings, IT is responsible for those. As we found out right before Christmas, one of them was unlocked with a key and not the swipe card, and it was left open by one of the custodians, and they left and went home that Wednesday before Thanksgiving. They only worked a half a day because all employees got off. Well, Cody gets a call, and there were close to 100 people standing in line, and all the lights were off, and nobody was in there getting tags, but there was 100 people lined up, and he had to run them out. So that comes back to IT is responsible for the security of that. Another idea that he was talking about is having not just color-coded on the front, but color-coded on the back, like green or yellow or red for the departments. And let's take, for example, if there's an active shooter in Teb's office downstairs in the trustee's office, a SWAT team comes in, SWAT team says, everybody put your hands up. Nobody knows where the active shooter is. You take that and on your lanyard or your retractable cord, you hold it up in the palm of your hand and you're escorted out. At least everybody would know, the SWAT team would know who that person is, that they're an employee. Also on top of that, Mr. Chairman, Cody has this already built into his budget to buy these cards and lanyards, so it was in this year's budget. It needs to be spent. He put it in there this past year, and we're just now getting around to following through on that request that you all have already approved.
Yep. Commissioner Stevens?
I just want to be sure we're not trampling on their handbooks if they already have policies in there, because they can make their own policies internally about who wears what and so forth. I think it's a good idea, but I just want to be sure that we don't overstep our bounds.
Okay. This is for a policy change for us to send it to the commission. Do we have a motion to advance this?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Rather. Do I have a second? I have a second from Commissioner Reed. Any discussion? Since there is none, Rachel, call.
Commissioner Cush?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Commissioner McAdoo?
Yes.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the next. Is our county social media policy. Ashley, come up. This is pretty long, so I want you to briefly discuss it, but I also want you to let this committee know that the problem that we had and the concern with somebody piggybacking on our social media. So I think we need to address that, because I think some of these commissioners need to know really how bad this is.
Okay, so just to be clear, this is more of an external social media policy, people posting on our county-run sites, our social media platforms and pages. It's to give us a more consistent process for managing and monitoring our social media platforms and pages. Nick and I worked on this together. We got some input from MTAS and did a lot of legal review, and this particular policy is modeled similarly to the town of Smyrna. So it's nothing new to this area, and municipalities of our size usually do have this already implemented. An incident that we had recently, but it's not anything that's new to government agencies. We did have someone that was posting on every single post that we had irrelevant content, and because they were trying to push something of theirs, and so we feel like, or push information that they had. So we feel like what we needed to do, since a social media site is a limited public forum, and we want to make sure that we're respectful of the First Amendment rights, but we also want to monitor the commentary on our pages, and this kind of just outlines the things that we won't tolerate on our page. We clearly state it in the policy. The policy would be clearly stated on all of our social media sites, as well as our website, and then people will be put on notice that if they violate this policy, that their comments will either be hidden or deleted, and if they are repeat offenders, then they would be banned.
Good. Any questions? All right.
Chairman, I have some questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Stevens.
First off, I read through this, and it looks like it applies to employees, not to the public.
It incorporates both. It reiterates some of the policy that we already have in the employee handbook.
I don't see anything in here about other people. It's all about employees, and I don't disagree that some of the things in here are needed, but I think we're really stretching it. You know, if somebody wants to post a comment that's not related to something that goes on our page, I'm not sure that we need to get into deciding what comments are acceptable and which ones aren't, or we might end up in a lawsuit for violating somebody's First Amendment rights. Like A and B comments not related to the particular social media article, or comments in support or opposition to political campaigns or ballot measures. I'm not sure that we can restrict somebody's speech on that, but like the profane language and the solicitations of business and things like that, I do think that those are items that could be regulated, but just somebody that posts an off-the-wall comment, you know, I'm really hesitant to take away their right to post that, even if we may not like it or think it's relevant to what we posted. Also, I have the same question I asked on the previous item. Did anybody ask the constitutional officers about this policy applying in their office?
So we only have one constitutional officer or office that has a government or a county government run social media platform, and that's the property assessor. And the Public Information Office, he's given administrative rights to the Public Information Office. No, he has not seen this policy. As far as the internal, that's something that's in, is this the same as what's in the employee handbook, or is his employee handbook different for social media? Right. And I'll have to let Nick speak to Nick did a lengthy legal review of the items that were in here as far as the legal aspects of those first two that you mentioned. So Nick, is there anything that you want to comment on as far as those go?
Sure. One, to Mr. Stevens's point about its applicability, first, this was modeled off of what other entities have used. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do a thorough review of it, which we did. But we wanted to ensure that it was clear that this policy did apply to employees, but I think it also naturally, because of under Section 2, it deals with county-owned or created social media, that this is an internal policy for how the PIO, Ms. McDonald, will maintain and will review and oversee the social media accounts. And so it's not just limited to employees that would be posting. It would be even citizens that are posting on our Facebook page or other Twitter or social media. That's the way that I understand how the policy would operate. The second point is Mr. Stevens is absolutely correct in terms of wanting to be mindful of First Amendment rights and not abridging those. The area of law that we're talking about here is probably the most complex area of constitutional law that there is, First Amendment free speech rights. Because you can have something that violates the free speech rights of a person where they don't even talk. They're just engaging in expressive activity. And it's something that the United States holds very dear, and so it's very important. With that being said, when the government opens up a platform upon which citizens can speak, the Supreme Court law will try to figure out what type of forum it is. And there are different types of forums. There's a traditional public forum like the sidewalk out on the square where you see people that have bullhorns and that have big signs up. And then there's limited public comment periods that like we have here at county commission meetings. And there's not a black letter here on what a Facebook wall is or what a Twitter wall is. Even the President of the United States has been engaged in litigation when he started blocking people, and that was found to be unconstitutional. You couldn't block people. But with that being said, there is a fair amount of case law out there that seems to interpret things like Facebook walls as what's called a limited public forum. And with limited public forums, that's unlike your traditional public forums, your public hearing, public comment periods, etc. And the government can impose more restrictions on the speech being used and can even make blanket exclusions of the types of speech getting used. So that's why if you see under 2.8, there's A through I of things that are not allowed on our Facebook page, on the county's Facebook page or other social media, that if they violate that it can be removed. Now, I agree with Mr. Stevens completely that whenever you have a policy like this, it is possible that you will get sued. Somebody will feel like their First Amendment rights have been violated. Whether the county wants to take this step and believes that it is important from an internal efficiency standpoint or for whatever to have this policy, that's for y'all to decide. We need to be careful, to Mr. Stevenson's point, of excluding certain viewpoints, okay? And these, by their very nature, should be content neutral. So A, comments not topically related to the particular social medium article commented upon. By its very nature, it's viewpoint neutral because you're just saying, hey, we've posted something about where the solid waste collection day is going to be. You can comment on, hey, I don't like that it's that day, or that day's stupid, or I can't believe that the county doesn't have more of these. But when you go in there and then you bring up something that's totally unrelated to that, you're not discriminating on viewpoint. You've limited it to the topic that's being discussed. So it is a very fine line to Mr. Stevens' point. This was tried to be crafted in terms of what's out there as a model. Like with anything that we do, it's not 100% foolproof. Nothing ever is.
And I should mention, too, that the county has an archive service for social media. So anything that we would hide or delete based on this policy would be retained for public record through that archive service.
I agree with a lot of the things that are in Section 2 about the PIO being the person that maintains these sites and keeping up with the passwords and monitoring for the violations that are listed in there and so forth. But I'm still hung up because it says in Section 1.1, this policy applies to every employee, whether part-time, full-time, etc. And then in Section 2.1, it says an employee may not characterize him or herself as representing the county. All throughout this, it talks about employees. There's nothing in there about citizens. So the things that are listed in Section 2.8, some of those could be done by employees or some of those could be done by citizen John out there, but it doesn't cover those. It only covers employees according to what it says in Section 1.1. And then if you go down and look in Section 3.4, it talks about in an official capacity, how these employees post on non-county social media site made it an official capacity. And then in 3.2, it talks about ways that they might do that with their county email address or job title, seal or logo. what's an official capacity? How do we regulate that? And then again, back up in section 1.1, it says that this applies to every employee who posts on any website, not just county social media. This applies to every employee who posts on any website. So if one of our employees goes and posts something on the Williamson County social media page, they could be disciplined for violating this policy. So I'm just not very comfortable with this. I think a lot of the things in there are good, but this is just, it needs to be thought through some more, I think, and I can't support it the way that it is.
Go ahead.
I haven't got to read the entire policy, so I apologize for that. I wasn't familiar with it coming up tonight. But why don't we leave the employee piece out? I'll go back and review what we've already got a social media policy in place, and I'll review. I'm pretty sure that some of the items may not be worded exactly the way they are in this current policy, but we can vet that out later. I can bring that back next month if there is something different. It's my understanding, if I understand the reasoning behind this, it's more about tags to our post. So if the county put, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Ashley, but if the county had a post up and somebody wanted to make a comment and they tagged it to something that was not related to the county, whatever the post was. Say we were talking about Christmas tree lighting at the courthouse on January 3rd or whatever, we were putting out there, and somebody made a comment, everybody come down, but then they tagged it to dog fighting in another town or something, something that's not appropriate or not related to the actual post. Am I understanding the reasoning behind this?
Yeah, so what I think a simple solution to this would be if we would completely separate the external and internal policies. Does that sound like something that would simplify this? We just completely separate the external policy that applies to citizens and in the limited public forums by all the county social media sites, which are monitored by the PIO, and then keep separate the internal social media policy, which is applicable to employees and officials.
Well, I think they could all be in the same one, but the way this is worded, it only applies to the employees. So if we wanted to add citizens into it, we could, do that. But I'm just the way it's worded, it says that any employee who posts on any website. I mean, that's pretty broad. And so if we have department head C that goes out and posts something on a personal Facebook page or on another county's page or something like that, I don't want them to get disciplined because they violated some kind of social media policy that our county has. It's just very broad. That's any website. That's pretty broad, and I think we can regulate our own. But I'm just really hesitant to say that our employees are going to be watched on what they post on other websites and blogs and Instagrams and so forth.
Mr. Chairman, may I interject?
Go ahead.
Maybe a possible workaround to keep moving this forward is out of this current draft, keep section 1.2. It defines what our social media is. Keep section 2 and employee may not characterize him or herself as representing the county. Get rid of section 3 so that just limits this to external commenting on county social media pages. And then Ms. Stevenson, I was not aware of that, but Ms. Stevenson referenced that there's already an internal policy for social media, so you just take out all the employee stuff and make this simply applicable as an external PIO policy. That's just a suggestion.
All right. Mr. Reed.
It seems like we're having problems with this right here. Why don't we just suggest that you just rewrite this to fix it? You already say we already have social media on our handbooks and what we at this time. Won't we just come back with it cleaned and fix the way that the discussion's going this way, and we'll look at it again at the next meeting?
That works
Would
for
that
me.
work?
And in the meantime, Sonia and I can get together, and if there's something in here that needs to be, where they can mesh, the internal and external policies. If there's crossover, then we can make sure that that language is the same too, and just bring them both back.
I think it'd just be better that, if we had this cleaned up where the things that's been injected here this evening, the questions that we've had here, that if we could fix this and make it right, where we'll have better understanding what we're doing, rather than sitting here and piecemealing, taking it apart and making it right.
All right. So you'll get that to us?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Now, you can get that to, if we need to, which I suggest that we get it before the county commission meeting. So that's not giving you much time, but I think it's important, so we need to address that then. All right. Let's move on.
Mr. Chairman, here, I was unclear. Was it going to be deferred until the next steering committee meeting for a recommendation from this body to be made, or is there some sort of recommendation that's being made now for the Board of Commissioners in next week?
Well, what I've suggested is that they get the wording and cleaned up, and we discuss it at the county commission, full commission.
Okay. I think it'd be appropriate to have a motion to that effect if that's what is going to happen.
You good, Commissioner? We got a motion to defer this to the county commission. Is that your motion?
I so move.
Do we have a second? Second, Commissioner Johnson.
Just a comment. So hold on. So the motion wouldn't be to defer it because it's still in this body and the steering committee. So I think if you're going to do a motion to defer, it's going to be to the next steering committee meeting. Alternatively, if you want to move this forward, then you need to make a recommendation to move this item forward with any changes that are just going to be presented at the next county commission meeting for discussion.
What you mentioned, basically, what would be taken out.
Which I guess, if I'm talking out loud, we would do what I said earlier to try and alleviate some of the concerns. I don't know if the commissioners will have any other comments, though, based on that draft.
Mr. Chairman, what my suggestion is that we allow these individuals to look at that again, rather than we putting this back and sending it back to the county commission without us seeing it again. I think we allow them to rework it and give them this opportunity to fix it, and rather than sending it on to the full commission without this committee seeing it again and making sure that it's what we are wanting and recommend it to the commission, I think when they bring it back to the next meeting and we look at this item again.
Okay. So your motion is to?
My motion is that we defer this to the next meeting.
Okay, we have a second by Commissioner Johnson. Any discussion? Go ahead, Rachel. Thank you, Ashley.
Commissioner Rather?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner McAdoo?
Yes.
Commissioner Cush?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes.
Commissioner Reed?
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yes.
Chairman Harris?
Yes. Gentlemen, on your iPad, you see a list of litigation. Is there any questions? None? We'll move on to other business. Representative Mike Sparks has asked to speak to this committee on the problem that we're having with mental illness. One of the things that I want to, and Mike, and we want to go into this in detail, but we want to, I want to keep, here's what I want you to understand is, I got all the numbers back from EMS, and we had 116 deaths, we got 6 pending, and we got 59 suicides. So we got a serious problem here, and Mike wants to talk to some, but I also know this matter pretty good myself. And a lot of these we have a lot of dual diagnose. And that's something that we got to look at as far as with mental illness as they combine together. So come on up, Mike. Sorry, Representative Sparks.
Thank you, Chairman. I know it's kind of been a little bit of a long night for you. There are some of the stats that you requested about suicide across our state. I invited Deputy Chief Chris Fly back there, and Sarah Carpenter with PC4S, which is Prevention Coalition for Success, that both of them are more boots on the ground than I am as a state lawmaker. Some of the issues y'all have discussed tonight about forwarding a resolution, and Mayor Ketron had it right. And we're going to meet with y'all next month, and I wanted just to run this by you, because it does help when we get a resolution and the backing, whether it's the county commission or the school board. It does help me when I'm before a committee asking for a bill to pass, and this has a fiscal note. It's hard to get bills passed that have a fiscal note. And as a fiscal conservative, I think sometimes we've got to invest. We've got to invest in mental health. Just 6 weeks ago, my wife got a phone call, and a lady that she did vacation Bible school with committed suicide. Just a upbeat lady, and left 2 daughters. They're 29, and we've known them since they were probably 10 years old. I think this hour, this minute, this year, the need for mental health and awareness and some kind of advocacy is greater now, this time, than ever before. I've watched the culture change. I've watched it change since I was sitting in that seat 10 years ago. Last year was I almost used profanity, Chairman Pettus, Reed, but it was a screwed up year. It was a messed up year. And I'm afraid the problem is going to get worse if we don't address the problem. What my bill does, and this bill, the history of this bill, came out of with the town hall that we did last year and a half ago at my church, November of 2019. Chairman Brian Terry was there, served on the panel. Chairman Craig Harris served on the panel. Monty Burks with Tennessee Mental Health and Substance Abuse served on the panel. Tennessee Mental Health Cooperative, Volunteer Behavioral Health, and others were there. Director Spurlock of the school board was there, school system, as well as Dr. Linda Gilbert. And thought a lot of Dr. Linda Gilbert. And also the late Commissioner Steve Irvin was there. And, as a lawmaker, I have to pick and choose the battles that I want to fight. And Nancy Allen gave me that advice years ago when I served with her, which was good advice, because you can't fight everything. You got to pick and choose. But when I look at the lobbying efforts that's out there, there's nobody lobbying for these issues. Yeah, we've got Sarah back there. We've got Tennessee Mental Health Cooperative. But we really don't have lobbyists that are just coming in the offices and lobbying our senators and lobbying our lawmakers. And these issues get overshadowed. But Dr. Linda Gilbert, I had a lot of respect for her. We didn't always agree on every issue. But through that town hall opioid meeting, I wanted just to read you this is the last email that I had received from the late Dr. Linda Gilbert, who probably knew more about education than most people in the state of Tennessee. But she said, I want to apologize for being late in responding. Please thank Representative Sparks for reaching out. Yes, more funding for counselors will certainly help with the social emotional issues that we're seeing. One area is social workers. They are vital, and many school districts are not able to fund them. I also think it would be helpful for him and other lawmakers to talk with school superintendents about the issues that we are seeing in very young children. The behaviors of our 6 to 9 year olds are like nothing else we've ever seen. Let me repeat this. It's Dr. Leonard Gilbert saying this. The behaviors of our 6 to 9 year olds are like nothing we have ever seen. They're inordinately disruptive and aggressive, and while we're bringing all of our resources into play, there is no place for these children to go and be assessed and be treated. I feel good about the Department of Education and what they're trying to accomplish in this area with the emphasis on the whole child. I'm hopeful that Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse will work alongside with them to address the upper tier of children for whom there seem to be no answers. When she passed, a lot of us had a lot of respect for her. And I thought, I need to really work hard on this bill. And I really think this is what she would want me to do. There's a lot of stats I could easily cite here. I'm not going to go into a lot of them, but one that I did want to cite was here's just one statistic. And this came from the Tennessee School Social Workers Association. They said high school and middle school students receiving school social work services in 2 rural districts had an average of 24% fewer absences and an average of 40% less behavior referrals after beginning services. The state of Tennessee, I will argue, has dropped the ball on mental health. We have dropped the ball. We can be great when it comes to fiscal management. We're great with recruiting businesses. We're great with infrastructure, but we suck at mental health. Let's just face it. We suck at treating people for addiction. We suck at a lot of things. And my effort is to turn this around. And you know, I don't think we need to throw money at the problem, but the people that I've talked to, the experts that I've talked to, everyone has agreed that this will help. The return on investment will be there. But it's a lot of clout if I get a resolution from y'all, and I'll approach the school board too. Spurlock, I was with him 2 weeks ago. He's supportive. But that's kind of what I'm asking here tonight. My assistant left you a packet here. Marvin's here with me tonight. But one thing that just a critical statistic I want to show you. The National Association of Social Workers, NASW, recommends 1 out of every 250 students. 1 out of every 250. Do y'all know how many we have right now? 1 in 4,000. We're missing the mark big time. And the reason I've got Deputy Fly back there is we had a bill last year we're working on in another area, but he was telling me it's 55% of his inmates, folks, are on some type of psychotropic drug. 55%. Probably roughly 70% of your inmates are dealing with an addiction, mental health problem, which mental health and addiction is, our Chairman Harris knows, they correlate and they parallel each other. But that's kind of what I'm asking here tonight before this body.
All right.
I'll take any questions.
Is there any questions? Thank you, Commissioner, Representative Spartan. Hey, this is very thought out. I looked at it. It's a good job. Yeah, I'll allow it, yeah. Sarah, real quick, come on. So if I get you correct, you're asking this body to give you a resolution on supporting this bill? Okay.
Social workers in our school system, that's all.
Okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Murphy, Director of the Prevention Coalition for Success. We are a nonprofit here in town focused on reducing and preventing substance misuse, including primary prevention in our youth and young adults. So we would support any and all systems, programs that can be put in place to help the mental health and well-being of our youth, whether they come from the state, the county, or a local organization here in Rutherford County. Certainly with COVID-19, it's increased risk across the spectrum. Some families probably just increased stress, other families leading to something more extreme. That could even be a traumatic experience for some of our kids. And we know when that happens, it has long-term consequences. Just what's already been mentioned, mental health concerns, substance abuse, suicide, and other all sorts of kind of health consequences that go along with that. So anything that we as a county can do to be preventative now to mitigate some of these long-term consequences that have been created by COVID, I would certainly be in support of.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah? All right. Commissioner Reed.
Representative, I appreciate you coming tonight and bringing this to us, because it's just quite interesting that just today our EMT director and myself were just talking about this and what has happened here in Rutherford County and what we're facing. And I know the chairman up here is very close in a lot of this too, and what we're seeing daily and what we're doing. And I received your phone call today, and you left me a message. And what was interesting, I just sat down and picked up my phone and I clicked on something, and you know how videos will pop up on your phone, and the individuals were in the process of singing the song Grandpa, the old song. I don't know how many of you remember that several years ago. The judge had it, and what it said was, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Sometimes it feels like the world's gone crazy. Grandpa, take me back to yesterday when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. And when I heard that and what you told me, what you're going to be talking about tonight, I thought, that's what's happened to us today, that, you know, things are not like what they used to be, and they change on a monthly basis in the things that we're seeing. And I think that's what we're running into with the COVID. And, you know, we just got through tonight reapproving a meeting that we had back in November, that we had discussion, and now we're going to have it again to do it over. One reason of that meeting, I think some of the things that possibly might have didn't work the way it was, but we had to schedule that thing 3 different times because of COVID. In other words, getting the people there at different times. And the whole scheduling of everybody today is like that. And we're all dealing with this. And I think that you're right on target here, that we got to be doing something.
Mike, what bill is this? I don't see a bill on here.
Well, the bill number for last year, I'll have a new bill number. It's 2051.
Can you get that to us so that we can?
Yeah, Marvin will email it to you tomorrow. It should
we'll
be.
Get you a resolution for, or we'll vote on a resolution for the February 4th while you're here.
Okay.
And will that be good?
Yes, sir. That'll be fine.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could just, I was talking with Chairman Harris yesterday and the mayor about this, also about a month ago we were talking about it. I asked him about the commission. I said, has your commissioners and your mayor been supportive of your efforts on the drug addiction and combating that and just bringing awareness to that and mental health? He really bragged on y'all. He really bragged on you, because I told him, I said, brother, I'll be honest with you. When I was up here, no disrespect, nobody, I just felt like I was the only one that really cared about this stuff, you know. But, you know, one area that some of the things you talked about earlier, you know, I tried to run a task force study asking for some of these issues that you talked about. They don't want to overload the tasker, but that's another idea that y'all could do that we could talk about next month when our delegation meets with you. So thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners, for your indulgence. Okay, thank you.
Mike, always a pleasure. Thank you. Well, here's the way I look at it real quick. What y'all did the last meeting when we started our billboard program shows that this committee is behind this. I have a personal story with this, and I'm so passionate about it, but I can't do it without y'all. There ain't no way. I can get up here and I can go to all these organizations, do all these town halls, I can't do nothing. But if we're all together and we work on this together, we can make strides and we can save lives. And I'm just telling you, I believe that in the bottom of my heart. Is there any other business? If there's none, this meeting's adjourned.